Good morning from Downing Street. Theresa May remains in post this morning after surviving a bruising vote of no confidence yesterday, which saw more than a third of Conservative MPs vote against her. She is now heading to Brussels for a crucial EU summit. She's hoping she may win concessions from European leaders to break the deadlock over the Irish backstop. Well, let's take a look at what has been another difficult 24 hours for the Prime Minister. Following a day of turmoil, Theresa May did win that ballot of no confidence in her leadership last night by 200 votes to 117. It guarantees she cannot be challenged for the leadership for another year. Outside Downing Street, Mrs May vowed to deliver the Brexit people voted for. The Prime Minister is later holding crucial talks in Brussels with the other 27 European leaders. She will be seeking to get greater assurances over her Brexit deal. Our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, reports.
Back to number 10 at the end of what Theresa May herself described as a long and challenging day, but it wasn't quite over yet. MPs had voted for or against Theresa May as Conservative leader, and the result, when it came, meant she survived.
The result of the ballot held this evening is that the parliamentary party does have confidence.
In the end, 200 MPs backed Theresa May and 117 voted against her. The Prime Minister couldn't ignore the fact that a third of Tory MPs had voted to remove her as leader, but she said the result would let her get on with the job.
We now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country. A Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, our borders and our laws, that protects jobs, security and the union, that brings the country back together rather than entrenching division.
Like the country, the Conservative Party is divided over Brexit. Supporters frame the result of the vote as a convincing win for Theresa May. Her critics said it was worse than she would have hoped and called on her again to resign.
The Prime Minister must realise that under all constitutional norms she ought to go and see the Queen urgently and resign.
The Prime Minister survives this challenge to her leadership, but her biggest problems have not gone away. Getting changes to her Brexit deal from the EU and convincing enough MPs to support it. Jonathan Blake, BBC News, Westminster.
We can talk now to the Conservative MP and former Attorney General Dominic Grieve, who joins us from Westminster. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning.
Is she stronger or weaker this morning?
I don't really think it makes very much difference. What it has shown is that attempts by some of my colleagues, mainly in the ERG, to get rid of her are going nowhere, and that was obvious before yesterday. I hope the message has finally got home to them as a result of yesterday. But I have to accept that the underlying issues are the same. That is that Brexit is an operation that carries huge risks for our country. And there are deep divisions, not only within our party, but within Parliament, as to how this should best be carried out. And that is the fundamental reason why we've got so much instability.
Just another thought on the members of the ERG. Jacob Rees-Mogg made absolutely clear last night he does not accept this. He said actually she should go and resign now. They're not going to go quietly. They're not going to make life easy for the Prime Minister.
I don't expect them to, and from that point of view I'm sure that this will not have changed their mind. I don't see any sign of that. But they do have to do some thinking about what they think is in the national interest, but also what is reasonably achievable. I don't know what attitude they're going to take. I have absolutely no idea, but one thing I think is quite clear is that as things stand at the moment, they're not going to unseat the Prime Minister within the Conservative Party.
Yesterday, Philip Hammond said it would flush out the extremists. Would you describe them as extremists?
No, I don't characterise them as extremists. We belong within a Conservative family. The difficulty is we have a deep ideological division, something which on the whole the party has avoided having over many generations. And this is causing us huge problems and is at risk of tearing us apart. It may be that is what will happen. But in the meantime, we have to govern. The country expects that of us, and we have to try to find a solution to the Brexit problem. And the Brexit problem, until it is solved, is going to continue to cause chaos. That's the key thing on which we should be focusing, not trying to replace the Prime Minister.
So a very divided party, as you say, the fundamentals are not changed. Is the only way now to resolve the issue of Brexit for the Prime Minister to reach out to other parties and seek a consensus across political divides?
I certainly think there's an opportunity for the Prime Minister to do that, and my own belief is that if the Prime Minister were to come forward and say that her deal should be put to the public in a referendum with the alternative to remain, I think it would attract quite a lot of support across the House and might enable her to solve this problem. Of course, you can argue that that's not an ideal solution either, but we've got to try to bring this matter to an end. And the reality is that my ERG colleagues are complaining that the Brexit she's delivering is not the Brexit which they and the people they represent expected. And there are others who are saying that it is indeed a bad deal, and that shows very clearly why, in fact, we are embarked on a dangerous course which is going to do huge damage to our country. Seeing that we had the referendum in 2016, it does seem to me to make sense to go back and ask the public if this is what they want, because I don't believe there is another form of Brexit readily available, and one which Parliament can deliver.
How quickly does the Prime Minister need to act to stop events being taken out of her hands again, in the likely form potentially next week of a vote of no confidence being called in the entire government? There are some voices within Cabinet who say what the Prime Minister needs to do is put her agreement to the vote next week, and for all the different options to be put to a vote so that the will of Parliament can at least be ascertained.
I certainly can't see why Parliament shouldn't be able to conclude its debate next week on the government's deal. Obviously, if the Prime Minister comes back with something over the weekend which is totally different from what we had before, then that might be a different matter. But I very much doubt that's going to happen, and I can't see any advantage in not allowing Parliament to express its view on the deal. Our EU partners have said they're not going to change the withdrawal and transition agreement at all. I don't know. And if that's the case, and they don't, can't be certain, then we ought to be voting next week on this deal, because it's only once we have got the issue of the deal that has been negotiated out of the way that I think you're going to start to see shifts within Parliament towards the proper consideration of alternatives. At the moment, the deal is acting as a block on doing that, and I think that's what we really need to try to focus on.
Dominic Grieve, thank you very much. Let's bring in our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. She's in Europe today. What are the chances of her getting anything that could help to break the deadlock here?
Today, I would think close to zero. The way the EU moves, it moves very, very slowly. And in terms of getting real changes to the withdrawal agreement, all the signs are that it's going to be a no too, because they've made pretty clear, whether it's Jean-Claude Juncker or Mr. Tusk or Leo Varadkar or Chancellor Merkel, I mean every single one have just said no, we're not reopening the withdrawal agreement. So the best Mrs May can probably get is some firmer language around the backstop. Will that satisfy the 117 who voted against Mrs May? Absolutely not. Which means Mrs May is still thundering towards this brick wall, otherwise known as her Brexit deal, and the meaningful vote. So, you know, last night, yes, of course, they're all going around trumpeting the size of the majority, saying it was comfortable and commanding. The political dynamics have not changed, even though cabinet ministers have been trying to talk up the fact that the leadership issue is now resolved and Mrs May is in a much place. Have a listen, for example, to Amber Rudd.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Will the Prime Minister secure new assurances from Brussels today?
I certainly hope so. She's got the support of the party behind her, and I wish her every success today in making sure that she delivers on the questions that some of my colleagues have had about the backstop. Thank you.
Do you think that puts leadership issues?
It does. Puts it behind us now. Good morning. So I hope that we can get on with the jobs in hand, which is delivering on a successful exit from the European Union, and also making sure that we get on our domestic agenda, because that is such an important part of why we're all in government. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
The truth is that this is now a deeply, deeply unhappy and divided party. You heard from Dominic Grieve there. Now, Dominic Grieve is one of the more mild-mannered Tories, but even he conceded that the party was in danger of tearing itself apart. And there is now not just a sort of an ideological divide, there is an emotional and psychological divide between these two camps. We had, as you mentioned, the Chancellor yesterday talking about flushing out the extremists. Ian Duncan Smith this morning swatting him down, telling him to moderate his language, and the Brexiteers will keep pushing and are demanding now that on the back of a third of her party voting against her, she should resign anyway. Here's Peter Bone.
Yes, I mean, if the result of this is that she unites the Conservative Party behind a real Brexit, then it's been a good thing. We won't know until January whether that's possible, but she can at least go to Brussels now and say, look, I've got a real problem back in my Parliament, you've got to give me some more so that people can unite and go through Parliament.
So there are, it seems to be, only two ways Mrs May can move forward with a deal. Either the EU suddenly blinks and offers up these wonderful concessions, very unlikely, or, and this is what some in her party are now saying, is she's got to look beyond her party. She's not going to get it through on Tory votes. There's a bloc of 117, probably more actually, who will vote against her deal whatever she gets. So how do you do this? Somehow you have to appeal across the divide. And interesting, when she came out last night, she talked about politicians of all parties coming together in the national interest. Bringing that about is very, very difficult. She does have an advantage, though. She's secure now for a year. There's nothing her party can do to touch her for a year. She doesn't have to worry about another general election. She says she's not going to stand. The problem is, will Labour show any appetite about beginning to work with her? And you have to say the signs are not massively encouraging. This is the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, this morning.
What we're saying is we think we can construct a consensus within Parliament around the sort of deal we put forward. Now, if the Prime Minister comes onto that agenda, there's a prospect we can move forward. If she can't negotiate that type of deal, our view is she should move to one side and let us get on with it, or have the general election.
I'll tell. So, Mrs May survives, yes. She goes to Brussels to negotiate. Has anything really changed? I'm tempted to say not. She still faces a deeply mutinous party, no obvious way of getting her Brexit deal through, and many bitterly opposed to each other within the Conservative Party and the rival camps.
And actually it's really blown it all out there, hasn't it? How divisive it is. Thank you very much, Norman. Well, how is the city reacting as it wakes up to another day of Brexit uncertainty? Our business correspondent Ben Thompson is at Leadenhall Market in the city of London. Give us a flavour of the reaction there, Ben.
Yeah, Joanna, thanks very much. Welcome to the heart of the City of London and to Leadenhall Market, this place that has survived world wars, great fires, deep recessions, and businesses just get on with things as they always have. But big questions now about whether we are any further forward today than we were 24 hours ago. Business is still waiting to hear what a Brexit deal could mean for them. The Tory party giving the vote of confidence in Theresa May. But will business give the Prime Minister the confidence and the faith in her to deliver a Brexit deal that they want? Well, with me, two people to discuss that. Ian's from the Food and Drink Federation, the personal finance editor at the Financial Times. Morning to you both. Ian, let's start with you in terms of what your members want, because we are no further forward, are we? And there are still very big fears that there may be shortages of food, there may be queues at the ports. Yep. None of this really addresses any of that.
No, and the big concern is that we're going to have to go on planning for no deal. That's costly, it's time-consuming, and it's extremely damaging for business confidence. But we can't do anything else because there is, at this point, no prospect of a solution to the problem.
What do your members tell you they want? Because we often talk about certainty, don't we? It's an overused phrase. Yeah. Business wants certainty. But it makes very big differences to their planning. They need to think about what they do in the new year already.
I don't think certainty isn't quite it. I think it's predictability. We need to know what we're going to be manufacturing into. What is the economy going to look like? And right now we have no clue. And because there are 3 or 4 possible solutions on the table, or options that we could see emerging as the way forward, that makes it extremely difficult to plan, and that is very bad for confidence. It's also extremely costly.
Claire, it's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people would expect to see a big reaction on the financial markets, certainly see a big movement in the pound. We got none of that yesterday because, frankly, as far as business is concerned, nothing's changed.
No, the vote of confidence wasn't resounding enough for the pounds to rise. It's still actually 1% down on the week. But in respect to what Ian was saying about people wanting certainty, what people really need is to make a decision, and that applies to people in their personal finances as well as businesses. There's figures out this morning from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors showing that property sales are flatlining, because if you don't have to make a decision, why bother making it now? Better to make it after the 29th of March, when we might have a clue which of the options on the table have actually been followed.
And when it comes to what we should be doing with our personal finances, there are so many questions too, of course, because if businesses are putting off hiring, they're putting off investment, that actually really does filter through to our pockets.
It does. And there was quite dodgy economic data earlier on in the week showing that business investment is slowing down and that the growth of the UK economy is really grinding to a halt. But where it will change is if consumers, you and me, stop spending the slightly devalued pound in our pocket. If we fear that we could lose our jobs, for example, in the future, not get as much overtime, or have to spend money stockpiling food, perhaps in the event of a no-deal Brexit, which I think personally is unlikely, then that's all money that's not flowing into the economy where it should be.
Claire, Ian, for now, thanks so much. Good to see you both. So there you have it. That's a taste of what business is thinking about so far this morning. As we said, in some respects, nothing has changed. We're no further forward on those negotiations than we were 24 hours ago. What business wants is some answers, but I don't think we'll get any answers to those questions that still are outstanding as far as that trade deal is concerned, on whether Theresa May can get that deal through Parliament to deliver business what it wants. Joanna, back to you.
Ben, thank you very much. Well, let's go now to Brussels. My colleague Casio Madeira is there. A big day ahead, of course, for those European leaders and for Theresa May. Kasia, what is the sense in terms of what might come out that might be helpful to Theresa May?
Well, we keep hearing, Joanna, about this no renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement. EU leaders here do not want that touch, that legally binding document. But the mood music here is that they do want to help Theresa May, especially given what happened last night, that they don't comment on domestic issues. Now, we have had wind of the conclusion, a draft council conclusion of what could potentially be the result of the next 2 days, this EU summit here, and a little bit of movement, not on the withdrawal agreement in any way, shape or form, but in the sense of the diplomats here saying that the withdrawal agreement, the best endeavours to reach an agreement during the transition period is what the withdrawal agreement says right now. What they could potentially amend, add on, is that they would continue to negotiate even if the backstop came into place. So a little bit of movement, something that possibly would show politicians back in the UK that they are looking at the backstop as being temporary, as something that they do not want to get into. Let's speak to Elmer Brock. He's an MEP who is on the Brexit Steering Committee. He joins us live from Strasbourg. Elmer, when it comes to the backstop, what is it that you can offer? You know how contentious it is for politicians back in the UK. What can you genuinely offer to Theresa May to make this passable back in the UK?
We can make a clear political declaration, but it's obvious. The backstop is there in order not to be used because it's an insurance. When we have the withdrawal agreement and the transitional period for the time of the negotiation for a proper future relationship agreement, free trade agreement whatsoever, we do not need the backstop because Britain stays in the internal market. When we have negotiated this far-reaching free trade agreement, then we do not need a backstop anymore. So the purpose, in our opinion, is never use the backstop. So there is no danger for the United Kingdom at all to stuck for all the time in a customs union.
But if you're saying that you're not going to use the backstop, if that's your aim, it's not going to be used, why have it at all, especially given how contentious it is?
It's like insurance. You do not take away an insurance, in a fire insurance, if there is no fire. You keep it. And therefore, use that withdrawal agreement properly to negotiate something that you do not need it. We have to look in the interest of our countries, of the European Union, especially on Ireland, as you believe to look into that. And I have sometimes the feeling it's a fight between people in the Tory party, it's a fight that Jeremy Corbyn can become Prime Minister. That is your internal party political battles in the United Kingdom, and we should be the victim of that. I think that is too far gone.
Well, your boss, Guy Verhofstadt, has described what is happening as a catfight within the Conservative Party, but he is the chair of the Brexit Steering Committee, describing this as a catfight within the Conservative Party. Is it, I appreciate that, is it helpful saying things like that, given that we've just had a confidence vote, given the tribulations, the pains that Theresa May has been going through?
Look, what these people, the British politicians, have said about us and are saying about us, what Mr. Verhofstadt has said, compared to that very mildly. If you talk about us sometimes, some people of you, in a very nasty way, please do not so mild on yourself.
Elmar Brok, MEP on the Brexit Steering Committee, many thanks for speaking to us live from Strasbourg. And Joanna, yes, it's going to be a busy day for Theresa May, and she'll be having meetings to begin with Leo Varadkar to start, and then of course she'll be then setting out her concerns to the rest of the 27 EU leaders.
Thank you very much, Kasia. So we've had lots of political reaction. Let's go further afield. Let's hear some views from around the UK. John Maguire is in Sunderland for us, gauging reaction there. John, over to you.
Yeah, morning, Joanna. We are right by the side of the River Wear here. Shipyards closed down here almost exactly 30 years ago in December 1988. As you can see, the port of Sunderland, though, still very busy. Since then, there's been a lot of work to regenerate this area. Part of it here is the National Glass Centre. We'll take you inside where they do glass-blowing demonstrations. 1130 degrees these kilns are. We've got Matt and Ian inside who can just show us the type of thing they're making. I think they've been making Christmas baubles for us here this morning. I'll just bring it up to here. If you've ever seen glass being blown and being worked on before, it really is quite mesmerising. They twist it round, they call that the gather. Obviously it needs a good set of lungs to keep that going. Perhaps it's not as hot as it should be. And that's a Christmas bauble being made, all the different colours of glass there. You can see it going. So a great tourist attraction for this part of the world. I think it might pop, might you? We've also gathered together some students to talk this morning from the University of Sunderland. This is a part of the UK that voted to leave the European Union, 61%. So it was one of the highest rates of leavers across the UK. Also famously, of course, this is the place where they return the results of any referendum or general election very quickly. So students past and present from the University of Sunderland, good morning to you all. Morning. Jess, you have ambitions to be a barrister.
I do, yes.
What do you make of the debate, the nature of the discourse that we've been experiencing the last couple of weeks, last night, last couple of years?
Last night especially, and the last couple of years, it's been quite a healthy debate over the last couple of years, and it's been nice to see, you know, quite a healthy debate in the sense that, yes, there has been quite bad discourse and people have had bad arguments and things like that, and there's been bad press about it, but there has been a healthy debate that's helped shape what the country wants, and it has changed a lot of people's opinions.
So you think opinions have changed?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, even just personally, having spoken with, I mean, Sunderland itself was voted quite strongly to leave.
Yes.
And I know quite a lot of people that did vote leave who have now that they know what's going on, have changed their opinion. Christy,
you're from Northern Ireland. The backstop, of course, such a key element at the moment. You know, the difference, perhaps, between getting an agreement and not. Just explain to us how important it is to you.
Well, the Northern Irish backstop, really, if it didn't go into play, would be detrimental to Northern Ireland, not just economically and politically, but also socially. We rely so heavily on the free movement between the north and the south. And as a country, we are very unstable, and that Good Friday Agreement is kind of the glue that holds us together. So without the free movement between the north and the south, that there is put into trouble, and their peace in Northern Ireland itself is in trouble as well.
And Adam, what do you think of the result last night, the confidence vote that we heard about? Theresa May, do you believe she's sort of hold beneath the waterline? Is she in trouble?
I do think she could have been in trouble last night. I think the party and across the board made the right decision to keep her as MP. I think for her own Conservative Party to oust her as Prime Minister would have been political suicide for the party in itself and would have caused major issues, and she has been given the worst of this bad deal. She's been left with this mess by previous administration and has had to pick up and move on and do something with it.
All right, thank you very much indeed, all three of you. So from the National Glass Centre, perhaps a bit of clarity, if that's not too bad a pun. Joanna, back to you.
Thank you very much. And it was certainly nice to see that Christmas bauble being blown as we obviously are in the run-up to Christmas, but in political terms it is all very unpredictable still. We've got Theresa May in Brussels today, hoping that she can get something that she might be able to bring to Westminster that might break the deadlock, but it is not looking favourable for the Prime Minister. There is a desire to help her out, we're hearing from Brussels, but nothing is going to fundamentally change the legal position of that withdrawal agreement. Much more reaction coming up here from Westminster. For now, I'll hand you back to the studio and Anita.
Joanna, thank you very much. In the day's other news, 4 people have been killed and another 43 injured following a high-speed train crash in Turkey. The train collided with another locomotive and then crashed into an overpass at a train station in the capital, Ankara, as the train was setting off on a journey to the central province of Konya. It's not clear what speed the trains were travelling when the crash occurred. Earlier we heard from our Turkey correspondent Celine Girit. Here's what she had to say.
The Minister of Transport has made a statement in the last few minutes, and the death toll unfortunately has risen to 9 now. We're talking about 9 people who got killed in this latest train crash, and we're talking about 46 people injured, some of them very seriously. This is not the first train crash that has taken place this year in Turkey. Unfortunately, earlier in July, another train had derailed and 24 people were killed in that train crash, and many questions were asked following that train crash, and after this the same questions, similar questions will be asked as well, like who was responsible, why did this crash took place. The Ministry of Transport said that this was an accident, a collision took place, but especially the relatives of the deceased will be asking to learn more.
Celine Girit. Hundreds of police, soldiers and border agents are involved in the hunt for a gunman suspected of opening fire near a Christmas market in Strasbourg. Sharif Shakat killed 2 people and injured 13 more in the attack on Tuesday evening. German police have also joined in the search after suggestions he may have fled across the border. Police are now asking for the public's help to locate the suspect, who they say was radicalized while in prison. The time is 9:28. The BBC has been criticised by the National Audit Office for overspending on the redevelopment of the set for EastEnders. It's likely to be £27 million over budget and more than 2.5 years late. Amal Rajan reports.
It's been the scene of dramatic revelations, crime, conspiracy, death, shootings and plenty of joy too. But Albert Square is showing its age.
Well, I'm sorry about they stopped pulling, but it's already across the road. He looks a bit dodgy.
Built in 1984 and originally designed to last for just 2 years, the set has been found wanting, unable to film in high definition and prompting concerns around health and safety. Now the BBC has been found wanting in its management of the project. The corporation says that building on a brownfield site is intrinsically difficult and points to procurement delays, lengthy contractual negotiations, value for money and inflation associated with construction. Yet the National Audit Office does find reason to criticise decisions and processes undertaken by the BBC.
And action!
EastEnders is such a vital jewel in the corporation's crown that securing its long-term future was not something the BBC could compromise on. Nevertheless, at a time when parts of the corporation are enduring sharp cost-cutting, this overspend is an embarrassment. Amal Rajan, BBC News.
From soap opera to political drama with Victoria Derbyshire at Westminster.
Hello, it's Thursday, it's 9:30. I'm Victoria Derbyshire here at Westminster with a special extended programme. Good morning. It is the morning after the night before and Theresa May is heading to Brussels to try to win more concessions on her Brexit deal after surviving that vote of confidence last night by 200 votes to 117.
We now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country.
The BBC understands the EU won't renegotiate the deal, but might give more assurances on the temporary nature of the Irish backstop, which is that sticking point for MPs who oppose the Prime Minister's plans.
Our focus has been on the withdrawal agreement and the changes that need to be made to it to get our support and the support of many other colleagues across the House of Commons. I don't think this vote really changes very much in terms of the arithmetic on that, and that's our concern.
Theresa May's critics are still saying she should stand down, insisting she'll never win the battle with her own MPs over her Brexit deal.
This isn't an ordinary election and an ordinary electorate. It's a very peculiar election, and that's why, if you look at the historical precedents, I still think the Prime Minister should resign, because she clearly doesn't have the full confidence of Parliament.
Hello, good morning, welcome to the programme. We're live until 11 this Thursday morning. Within the last hour, Theresa May has set off from Downing Street and is now on her way to Brussels for another EU summit. She will also meet for talks later with the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar. Obviously, she's trying to get concessions on her Brexit deal in order to try and get it over the line. I feel we have been here before. It does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, despite the events of last night. So what do you want to happen next? Use the hashtag Victoria Live. Send us an email, bbc.co.uk. Just over 12 hours then since Theresa May found out she had the backing of her MPs, but not all of them by a long shot. She won that confidence vote by 200 votes to 117. Here's a report with some flash photography.
The result of the ballot held this evening is that the parliamentary party does have confidence.
I'm pleased to have received the backing of my colleagues in tonight's ballot. Whilst I'm grateful for that support, a significant number of colleagues did cast a vote against me, and I've listened to what they said. Following this ballot, we now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country. A Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, our borders and our laws, that protects jobs, security and the union, that brings the country back together rather than entrenching division. That must start here in Westminster, with politicians on all sides coming together and acting in the national interest.
Well, is that a vain hope? Politicians on all sides coming together and acting in the national interest? Let's talk now to Conservative MP Richard Harrington, who is a business minister and supported the Prime Minister last night, and Conservative MP Sir Bill Cash. He was one of the 117 who did not support the Prime Minister last night. Welcome both of you. Richard Harrington, how long has Mrs May got?
Well, Mrs May has said when she spoke to the 1922 committee, that's Conservative MPs last night, that she would not be standing in the election in 2022.
So how long has she got?
Well, till 2022.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not weeks or months?
Not weeks or months.
How demoralising is it that over a third of her party voted against her?
Well, I'm very uplifted by the fact that 2/3 voted. Victoria,
wasn't quite 2/3, was it?
Well, more or less. But this was not a conventional confidence motion. This was about the compromise that she's putting forward on Brexit. So therefore, it was really a vote on that more than her leadership. So it was a kind of, the way I see it, it was a kind of mini referendum within the Conservative MPs on the deal. Well, that news was in the market. We all knew from what we'd read in the papers and from speaking to colleagues like Bill and others that there were a significant number of people that were not in favour of the compromise deal that she'd put forward. She'd listened to that. She's gone to Brussels, Ireland. She couldn't go to Ireland yesterday because of this ridiculous divisive confidence motion yesterday, which was completely irrelevant. And now she's back in Brussels doing what she's paid to do, which is to try and adjust the arrangements that she put forward to take into consideration what people like Bill and his colleagues very responsibly said, because that's what they believe, although I don't agree with them.
Bill Cash, you and your fellow Eurosceptic MPs failed to bring her down.
That is not the issue, actually, in this case.
You
the
have
reality
failed.
is, no, the reality
That was a
is...
success.
No, I'm saying that from a practical point of view, it was 117. We went up from 48 votes to 117 because 48 triggered the confidence motion, but it went up to 117. And let's face the fact, no, wait a minute, let's face the fact that in terms of the people who actually voted for her, I understand why, most of them were on the payroll anyway, in one shape, form or another.
Okay.
So that's an issue in itself.
Did
but
you go
the reality
too
is
soon?
It doesn't change anything, no.
Did you go too soon with no alternative strategy or leader?
Well, I think actually that is not the case, because this had to be done now, because we had the withdrawal agreement pulled from the vote only a few days ago, and the reality is that that was running away from the issue, and the issues haven't changed.
But do you
That's
accept,
we
will get onto the issues, I promise you.
I hope
do you
so.
accept that you have lost momentum now because she can't be challenged for a year?
Not in the sense in which we're looking for something which is a substantial change in the withdrawal agreement, and there is no chance of that happening. And the DUP, and let me just emphasise this, the DUP will not agree to the proposals which are currently being put around over the backstop. And what that really means is that we could lose the DUP in terms of our ability to govern this country. That is a key issue, and that remains
You're
on the
smiling
table.
at that, Richard Harrington.
Well, I don't know why.
Victoria, I'd just like to really, I try my best not to take Bill to task, but this condescending view that the only reason that people like me voted for the Prime Minister yesterday is because I'm on the payroll, that's the last thing on my consideration. The reason I voted for it is because I believe in compromise, and if people like him were far more flexible and not sticking to this ridiculous dogma, which is a minority of a minority view.
It's not actually.
Which is, Bill, it is. I'm very sorry, but
Could I say that
this is a tiny view.
Richard,
speak to my constituents.
please.
Speak to my constituents that voted to leave, not the ones that voted to remain.
No.
I understand.
Richard, I understand.
They want a
Look,
compromise.
I respect you, but I have to say this, that actually the Withdrawal Act is the key question. The Withdrawal Act was passed by the House of Commons. You voted for it. Even Ken Clarke voted for the third reading. That says we will leave the European Communities Act 1972 on the 29th of March 2019. This withdrawal agreement undermines the repeal of the 1972 Act. There is a real issue of substance. And furthermore, one last point on the constitutional front, which is really important. This isn't abstraction. This is about reality. Do we actually get subjected to laws that are made by the other member states by a majority vote in the Council of Ministers without even behind closed doors, without even a transcript of what's going on? And the Northern Ireland issue. This is real stuff. It's real stuff.
Absolutely. Would you describe Bill Cash as an extremist, that, like the Chancellor did?
Extremist?
I could describe Bill as many things, but I don't think extremist would be one of the words
Certainly not.
I would use.
Democrat.
Chancellor describing you like that.
Well,
and now you've been
first
flushed
of all,
out, apparently.
well, no. Actually, as a matter of fact, we're not only are we not extremists, we're Democrats. We're backing the vote of the British people and the Withdrawal Act, which Richard and the others all voted for, which is to get out of the European Communities Act 1972.
Victoria, although extremist is not a word I would choose, but I do believe, I'd like to reiterate, that his is a minority view in the Conservative Party, and it's a minority view in the country. To leave in the end of March, as you quite correctly said, in 2019. But I must tell you, Bill, we've got Sarah Wollaston on next, who is a member of the People's Vote campaign, campaigning for a second referendum. And with what you're doing now, if there is a possibility of us not leaving, it will be because of the behaviour of you and your colleagues.
It will not.
Because you're
Richard,
inflexible and you will not accept a compromise.
To the Withdrawal Act, which was passed by the House of Commons, including passed by you, to repeal the 1972 Act in line with the decision that was taken by a majority in the country under the referendum.
If I may, gentlemen, this is an illustration, a microcosm of the pretty vicious infighting going on.
Well, it's not vicious, actually. No, it's not. We won't say that.
It's
a serious disagreement.
Yeah.
A very serious disagreement.
And we know that with language like extremists and...
Well, that's not our language.
It being reported that Jacob Rees-Mogg, a Conservative backbench colleague of yours, who is very Eurosceptic and a real critic of Mrs May, described your headquarters yesterday apparently as a kill zone. Is that true?
I haven't heard anything like that. I've never heard of it. Sorry, Victoria.
Right, okay. But how do you bring How is it? Maybe it's impossible to bring these two sides of the Conservative Party back together. And maybe you should split and create a new party.
Well, that's not the question.
No,
actually,
can
I say something?
Do you fear a split?
Can I say something? If we
Do you fear a split?
No, I'll tell you why. Very simply, because when we get to a confidence motion, if we do, the Conservative Party...
You mean in the whole government?
Of the whole government. It's just possible that will happen.
Well,
and if that does happen, we will all vote to keep the Conservative government in power, and so will the DUP. On those terms,
right.
I'm quite sure.
There's absolutely no chance someone like you aligning with Labour in a no-confidence motion in the government in order to bring the Prime Minister down because you hate her
Well,
deal
we
so
had
much.
this over Maastricht when I led the rebellion against the Maastricht Treaty,
no
and I wouldn't
do
it. None at all. And furthermore, the DUP won't either, because so long as we end up with a government which actually subscribes to the constitutional arrangements for Northern Ireland, and that is what is at risk here, there will be no change in our position regarding the government.
OK. Do you accept that backstop has got to be changed radically for people like Bill Cash to vote for this deal?
I accept that for Bill Cash and his others, this is a very important issue. That's very true, Victoria. But I would say to them, life is about compromise. If they stick to this inflexible view...
This is a capitulation, Richard.
Please let me finish, Bill, and then I allowed you to finish. If they stick to this lack of flexibility and dogma, they will cause a people's vote, and probably people will vote to remain. It's not what they want. I respect the result of the last referendum, but it's about compromise. So what matters to me, and what the Prime Minister is doing, is to try and protect jobs and the economy, and yet allow them to have their control of immigration, the Supreme Court, and European institutions, which people said they didn't want to be part of.
Victoria,
can I just check? She said, in the Lancaster House speech, we do not truly leave the European Union unless we regain control over our laws. We're not doing that, and we are, at this moment in time, got a Withdrawal Act which was passed. That is clear that we're leaving the European Union, and unfortunately this withdrawal agreement undermines that because it changes the 1972 Act.
When should the vote be? Before Christmas or after? Briefly.
I'm not sure, Victoria. I think that's for the Prime Minister to decide. For me, I'd much rather that it's the right compromise and the right vote. And if it's deemed that that's before the middle of January when it needs to be, so be it. For convenience sake, if it was before Christmas, that would be great. But maybe it's not possible.
One last
this is
point.
really detailed stuff.
When do you think it should be?
That is completely unpredictable because it's in the hands of the government.
When do you want it to be?
Well, I want it to be as soon as possible, actually.
Before Christmas?
Well, I would very much like it to be, but I don't think it will be. But you cannot compromise over the law of the land, and that's what the European Communities Act repeal really is, and that was agreed by Richard and all the others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.
Eddie on email says, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with that vote last night on Theresa May's confidence on the ballot card. It was confidence and no confidence, just like the referendum vote, in or out. So can we have a rerun of the confidence vote? This texter says, Jacob Rees-Mogg uses the argument that the majority of backbenchers are opposed to Theresa May, but they are a self-selected group who have either resigned from government positions or refused to take them. They do not represent the average non-partisan Conservative MP. Glyn texts, this, what Mrs May is trying to deliver, is not what the people voted for. Is she mad? This texter says, if the UK can't negotiate a good exit deal with the EU, what chance of good trade deals on leaving? In desperate negotiating position with amateur negotiators. Now, that's from someone who doesn't leave their name. Let's talk to another Conservative MP now. Sarah Wollaston supported Theresa May last night, but believes the Prime Minister will have to eventually take her deal to the people. Can you talk through how you think that would happen in practical terms?
Well, what we said in the last interview is that there are two different competing versions of what people voted for in the last referendum, and the reality is that Parliament has reached gridlock, Victoria, in that there's no version that's going to pass the Commons, and so eventually we either fall out with no deal and no transition in just over 100 days, or we actually ask the Prime Minister to take the deal back to the people and ask them a simple question: is this what you voted for? Is this what you meant by Brexit? Or would you rather stay with the deal that we already have?
You are not helping the Prime Minister either. Why don't you give her a break?
Well, I mean, I have. I voted for her last night. I've got huge respect for her public... Because actually the point for me is that I don't think we have informed consent to this version of Brexit. This is just the start. The future framework, which is just a short 26-page document, is little more than a wish list. So if anybody thinks voting for this means that Brexit is done and dusted, actually they need to look carefully, because what they'll see is we've got years ahead of us of this kind of wrangling over Brexit with no leverage within those negotiations. So people like me that look at this, I'm the chair of the Health and Social Care Committee in Parliament, and what I see is that there's no version of Brexit that does anything but harm to our NHS, public health, research.
So you want a so-called people's vote, and with the hope that people would vote to remain?
Actually, because as a clinician I know that people can consent to things that are risky because they feel the benefits outweigh the risks.
Yes.
What I think is now we know what Brexit looks like. This is the deal, warts and all.
Yeah.
The right thing to do in my view, because we're more than 2 years from the referendum, now we know what Brexit looks like. Take it to the people, because Parliament frankly isn't going to vote for it, and say, ask the people, is this what you wanted? And if actually the people vote for that, I will accept that 100%, because it'll be informed, valid consent in my view.
I mean, you know, Mrs May has said there will not be a second referendum while she is Prime Minister.
But then she has also said in the past there wouldn't be a general election. Sure. And there are two ways forward here, Victoria. We either go for a referendum on the actual Brexit deal, or we crash out with no deal.
There are
and
more
no
ways than
transition.
that, Sarah Wollaston.
No, but they have to pass Parliament, and the fact is that Parliament's in gridlock. It's just the reality.
It is in gridlock now.
Yeah.
What about if Mrs May reached across the House to board some Labour MPs? What if?
I wish she'd done that in the first place.
Okay, hang on. What if she said, OK, we'll go for a customs union?
Of course, she may decide to put forward the so-called Norway Plus model, but those who voted against her last night would be even more opposed to a sort of Norway-style plus a customs union Brexit.
But she could get enough Labour
I don't think
MPs
she
on
would.
board.
I don't think any version of Brexit will pass the Commons. As I say, this is just me expressing what I think is the reality of the situation, that we've reached gridlock.
So do you think it's the government's duty now to make sure this country is absolutely prepared for leaving on March the 29th, deal or no deal?
To be quite honest, we are no way prepared for an exit, a chaotic exit in just over 100 days.
So those preparations really do have to step up.
But the point is, even if they step up, we will see very serious unintended consequences that will hit people's lives. I mean, in our committee we've been looking at the consequences for the supply of medicines and medical devices. There would be very serious harms that would affect people's lives. That's what we're talking about here. I don't think any responsible government could let us crash out with no deal and no transition.
But if there were enough preparations?
There won't be in time.
Okay.
We're simply nowhere near that. We're going to have to extend Article 50, whatever, in my view.
Okay, we'll see what happens. She has, Mrs May has effectively sort of fired the starting gun in the race to succeed her. If someone like Boris Johnson or Dominic Raab or David Davis were to end up as leader of the Conservative Party, what would that do for somebody like you?
I mean, certainly if the Conservative Party moved off to the right, that's not where I am. Well, that's not where I am, and I would have to very seriously think about whether I could continue. But the point is, last night they had their opportunity last night, and what we saw last night was the Conservative Party deciding against forming a circular firing squad, but also delivering a very clear message to the Harvest Brexiteers that there's no majority in Parliament for their version of Brexit or their right-wing style.
Right. And there's no majority in Parliament for a second referendum, which is what you want.
No, but I think, as I say, when you reach gridlock, you have two alternatives, and it's either over the cliff or ask the people, and I think the people would prefer to be asked than to go over the cliff.
Thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you, Sarah Wollaston, Conservative MP. Many messages, as you can imagine, wherever you are in the country. Let us know your reaction to the events of the last 12 hours and what you want to happen next. Victoria on Twitter says, the Queen to step in now and dissolve this utter shambles of a government. She has more political experience than the lot of them combined, and she puts her country before herself. Ed says this can't continue. Nothing has changed. The Prime Minister continues on a no-win course. Could still further with false confidence following the vote last night. Parliament needs to rethink urgently or lose all democratic credibility. Masked Enigma on Twitter says the ERG have lost power. They can't replace the leader, and there is a clear majority in Parliament not to have no deal. Their ability to blackmail has been diminished and their views have become irrelevant for Brexit. It can only be a soft Brexit or remain now. And this texter, Mayhem, is now confirmed as a lame duck Prime Minister. It's clear that the only ones she can trust are EU leaders, yet she treats them with the same contempt and arrogant deceit as everyone else. Will she now at last stand up to the European Research Group? That's the group of backbench Conservative MPs like Sibylle Cash and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who do not like her Brexit deal at all? Or will she remain wishy-washy, weak and wobbly? Amid the drama of last night's vote, one thing that happened that potentially may have passed you by, the Prime Minister reinstated the whip for two Conservative MPs who had been suspended from the party. One was Andrew Griffiths, who resigned as a business minister in the summer after lewd text messages of a sexual nature he sent to two women from his constituency. They leaked. And the other was Dover MP Charlie Elphicke. He was suspended in November last year and has since been interviewed under caution by the police for alleged sexual offences. Charlie Elphicke has denied wrongdoing and said yesterday that he remains as confident as I've always been of clearing my name. One MP who's very angry about the fact that the two suspended MPs had the whip restored so they could vote in that no confidence vote last night is Labour MP Jess Phillips, and she's here. Why were you cross about that, Jess Phillips?
Well, when the whole Me Too movement and the Westminster sexual harassment scandal started, we were told by people like Theresa May and Andrea Leadsom that power and patronage would no longer play a role in this, that it didn't matter which political party you were from. If you had committed wrongdoing, we needed a proper process to deal with it. And Theresa May yesterday basically proved that she lied when she said all of those things to the women staff in that building, to the women who might have been abused by MPs or lords or people who work in Parliament. She lied because actually when it came to it, all that mattered was that she wanted their votes, and she stopped the process of their suspensions and let them back in because she wanted power.
Does it matter that apparently the two men cancelled each other out? We're told that Andrew Griffiths supported the whereas it's reported that Charlie Elphicke did not support her last night.
I don't care for the psychodrama of the Tory party and whether they cancelled each other out. What I care about is that process, promises and frankly principles were completely roughshod over. What does it say to women who are going to come forward and say that they have been treated, that they have been sexually assaulted, that they have been sexually harassed? What that says, what happened yesterday, says to them, we don't care. The boss, both of the country and of the Conservative Party, basically mandated gropey MPs yesterday. I am utterly disgusted. I wasn't interested in...
There are allegations and investigations. Is it fair to say she mandated gropey MPs?
Well, she basically stopped a process from going on in order to curry favour. That's what happened yesterday.
And what do you think of that? How would you describe that?
I think it's absolutely despicable. I think that we were promised that things would be different. The Me Too movement means absolutely nothing when the most powerful person in our country basically says, oh well, never mind.
Can I ask you, Jess Phillips, about Labour's position? There is some frustration amongst Labour supporters that the Labour front bench is not capitalising, it is perceived, on this moment of crisis for your political rivals because they haven't launched that no confidence motion in the government.
Yeah, I think as time ticks on, it gets a bit unusual that the Labour Party hasn't launched a no confidence motion. We certainly have no confidence in the Prime Minister. It would be difficult to have any confidence in her at the moment.
But you know what the argument is that at this point you wouldn't win. So what is the point?
Well, I mean, I can see it from both sides. I'm sorry, this is a terribly politician's answer. I can see it from both sides. I think that nobody wants gesture politics at the moment, actually, in the country, and I think that what happened in the Conservative Party yesterday tells us that the country